So for my project, I chose to do perfectionism. And so we're going to talk, or I'll talk a little bit about some research that was done and definitions they came up with, and then some unhealthy and healthy characteristics, and some things teachers and counselors and parents can do to help students who are gifted and have perfectionism and things like that. So let's just get started with what is perfectionism. So Schuller in 2002 did a study about perfectionism in gifted students in a rural setting, and they were in middle school. And the research had the students describe what perfectionism meant, the gifted students. And so, as you can see, they said correct answers, very organized, and doing everything right. So that is how gifted students define in this research what perfectionism is. So Greenspan did research in 2005 about perfectionism, and the definition they came up with was perfectionism means to have the desire to be perfect, and anything less than perfect may be necessary at times, but it is never acceptable. So I also like another definition that Greenspan defined perfectionism in. They say perfectionism is a desire to be perfect, a fear of imperfection, and an emotional conviction that perfection might be the route to personal accessibility. To a perfectionist, to be in error means to be flawed. So this definition, in my mind, I believe is more negative viewed, because it does say the fear to be imperfection, and for a perfectionist to be an error means to be flawed. And so when a perfectionist has this mindset, they are more likely to have unhealthy characteristics of perfectionism. So during Hewitt and Flint, they did research about perfectionism, and they defined it in 1991 as a multidimensional and encompassed both individual and interpersonal trait components. And within this research, they concluded with three major traits of perfectionism. The first is self-oriented perfectionism. This requires self to be perfect, so this requires the student to feel like they have to be perfect. Other-oriented perfectionism, that requires for others to be perfect. And socially prescribed perfectionism, which are perceptions that others require the self to be perfect, perceptions that others require the self to be perfect. So Hewitt and Flint came up with these three major characteristics in 1991 with their research. So perfectionism and the pursuit of excellence. So Greenspan in 2005, with their research, they kind of define the difference between them. They say perfectionism is neither about pushing oneself nor about setting goals too high. It is not about the pursuit of excellence. Perfectionism is about the unrelenting desire to be perfect. So perfectionism, they're always going to have this continuous desire to be perfect, whereas the pursuit of excellence is not it's not really continuous, and it's not, excellence is almost perfect, whereas perfectionist is the desire to be perfect. So back to Schuller's study. Schuller in 2002, with the study about the middle schoolers who were gifted in a rural setting, they concluded that there are unhealthy characteristics and healthy characteristics of perfectionism. Some of these unhealthy characteristics include continuously anxious about making mistakes. They question their own judgment, and when they question their own judgment, they kind of ask, should I question? Should I do this? And they're questioning their thinking almost. And unhealthy perfectionists, they held extremely high standards for themselves. Healthy perfectionists had strong need for order and organization. They accepted mistakes and enjoyed their parents' high expectations for them. So when I was doing all my research about this, especially Schuller's article or research, the main difference was how unhealthy perfectionists and healthy perfectionists reacted when they made a mistake. Unhealthy perfectionists, they usually they were frustrated and angry, whereas healthy perfectionists knew how to cope with making a mistake or their perfectionism. So more in depth about healthy perfectionism, and Schuller says that students with a healthy level of perfectionism are supported by friends, families, and teachers. And next, we'll see how those are actually some influences of perfectionism. Students who had healthy perfectionism stated their parents encouraged them to do their personal best academically. Students in the study who had healthy perfectionism were self-motivated to do their work hard, cooperate, and be organized. As we'll see next, unhealthy perfectionists, they really were more focused about academics as their perfectionist. Unhealthy perfectionists describe perfectionism as being correct, no screw-ups, redoing work, and doing doing work a certain way. I meant to say no redoing work. So they see it as, okay, I get one chance at doing this. For unhealthy perfectionists, mistakes were not opportunities to learn, but humiliations to be avoided at all cost. So unhealthy perfectionists, they usually have a high level of anxiety because of they want to avoid new opportunities, they want to avoid making a mistake and putting themselves in a situation where they're not certain they can do a task 100% the right way or meet the standards. So Schuller's study found that gifted students who are unhealthy perfectionists were concerned about making mistakes. High anxiety there. So there are different types of perfectionists that Schuller discovered in 2002 in the research, and they are intrapersonal perfectionists, which an example is people in love never feel anger towards each other. Identity perfectionism is an example is the refusal to believe that one can be accepted by others if one is flawed. And then moral perfectionists, one cannot forgive themselves for falling short of a personal goal or standard. So I was talking about some different influences of perfectionism, and one is the self. The self has a big role in perfectionism and the mind of a healthy and unhealthy perfectionist. And so healthy perfectionists are primarily motivated by self-motivation. Unhealthy perfectionists believe that healthy perfectionists were highly critical of themselves. Another influence is family. Healthy perfectionists believe they were more perfectionist. They were more perfectionist than their parents. The unhealthy perfectionists perceived their parents to be more perfectionist than they were. Another influence is teachers, and teachers who stressed organization, neatness, and order in schools and schoolwork were seen by healthy perfectionists as affirming their desire for order in their lives. Perfectionists seek to please teachers by working hard. Unhealthy perfectionists feel pressured by teachers to perform well. And then social or school friends and peers, they also can be an influence of perfectionism. So healthy perfectionists say competition with friends was a positive influence. However, unhealthy perfectionists say that competition with others added pressure to perform without error. So like calling on a student to read aloud, this for perfectionists, they need to read every word correctly. And they have this anxiety that if they mess up, it's kind of like a competition with each other. They messed up, they made a mistake, and they can grow angry, or how they don't have the skills to cope. So now we're going to talk about perfectionism and underachievement. So our professors, Dr. Mofield and Dr. Parker Peters, and their colleague, I'm going to try to pronounce the name, but it's probably not going to be correct. Charak Baroti Ghosh. I'm just going to call it Ghosh. In 2016, they all collaborated and did research about perfectionism and underachievement and coping and things like that. And so one thing they found was perfectionists can be so concerned about making mistakes that instead of taking chances, they resort to inertia or like a total state of rest. So instead of doing anything, they just are in this state where they aren't doing anything. So perfectionists also may resort to underachievement as a means to cope with high standards. So underachievement and perfectionism may serve as a defense mechanism to avoid the risk of failing. So Going back to the second research quote from the research that Mofield, Parker, Peters, and Grosch found in 2016, underachievement was a means to cope with the high standards. So if they knew they were going to fail those high standards, they just weren't going to do anything. And so that actually leads us to perfectionism and self-handicapping. So what is self-handicapping to begin with? Well, Covington in 1992 describes it as creating obstacles to a successful performance that enables individuals to deflect the cause of low performance away from their ability on the created impediment. So instead of, you know, meeting these standards and things like that, they're creating obstacles. So what is considered a self-handicapping behavior? Procrastination, leaving little time to study before an exam, or lack of sleep. And that's from Adelson in 2007 in their research. So who even is at risk of self-handicapping and this perfectionism? Well, perfectionist, gifted students who are concerned about self-image are more likely at risk of self-handicapping. So how to help students with perfectionism. So all of these tips come from Anthony and Swinson. So just a couple of these that I'll read aloud are model and encourage saying I don't know, which is a really big deal for them. Help the child develop realistic schedules and goals and standards, and then avoid comparing one child to another. So here are all my resources about my project and where I found them. And yeah.